We are now ready to understand the famous, perhaps too famous, Schrödinger's cat paradox. We saw that superposition in the strange world of quantum mechanics implies that objects can be in more than one eigenstate simultaneously. For example, in several places at the same time, or spin clockwise and anticlockwise at the same time, and so on. If you assume that you understand all this, then, as American physicist Richard Feynman used to say, you probably don't understand quantum mechanics. This totally paradoxical universe confused and eluded any reasonable explanation by the best minds of the 20th century. Until his last days, Einstein could not accept this state of affairs. This prompted other great scientists, such as the Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger, to propose a slightly eccentric thought experiment. Schrödinger wondered about the weirdness of quantum superposition principle. The question to which he was seeking an answer was, why do we not observe objects in the macroscopic world, in our everyday experience, in superposition states? It seems that these strange and counterintuitive properties, such as superposition, emerge only in the tiny microscopic realm. And yet there is no reason, nor any known physical law, that forbids the same effects from taking place also on larger scales for objects as big as a human body or a cat, for instance. To better visualize the problem, Schrödinger used the cat experiment to illustrate why there is no reason to believe that superposition should not hold equally well for cats as it does for elementary particles. He reasoned as follows. Imagine a cat in a closed box, having no interaction with the outside world. In the same box is a radioactive substance which at any instant can emit a particle due to atomic decay. We have learned that radioactive decays are also strictly probabilistic phenomena. It is quantum tunneling that determines the decay of an atom's nucleus. Because this quantum tunneling is a purely quantum phenomenon, you can't ever determine when an element decays before you observe it. Just as you can't say that a particle has a specific position or spin state before you measure its position or intrinsic angular momentum. So does the element which finds itself in a superposition of decayed and not decayed state. However, from the statistical point of view, we can predict how much average time is needed until half the atoms do decay, the so-called radioactive half-life time. This tells us the probability that decays will take place and how many decays on average will take place after some time. However, we will never ever be able to predict when exactly the single decay event will take place. Schrödinger therefore imagined that the box also contains a Geiger counter, that is, an electronic device that clicks when it detects a particle emission. When it measures a decay, it releases a hammer that breaks an ampoule containing poison, and then this kills the cat. However, this will occur only if that one atom of the radioactive substance decays. Because this is a perfectly quantum probabilistic event, as long as we do not open the box, the wave function still has not collapsed. According to the rules of quantum mechanics, the cat, the radioactive material, the hammer, the ampoule containing poison, must be in a superposition state. This means that the ampoule is broken and intact at the same time. The hammer is released and not released at the same time. And therefore the cat must be dead and alive at the same time. Only when we open the box to check on the health conditions of the animal, does the wave function collapse, which means we make the observation, the act of measurement, and project the cat in either the dead or alive eigenstate. However, before the instant of observation, quantum physics seems to suggest to us that the cat indeed exists in a sort of ambiguous reality in which it is alive and dead at the same time. This is substantially the famous Schrödinger paradox, cat paradox. In fact, as in the case of the single elementary particle, such as an electron, we know that it can be in a coherent state as long it does not undergo a measurement which projects it on one of its definite eigenstates. The same applies to quantum cats. As long as a measurement does not take place, the cat finds itself in the superposition dead and alive at once. This is formalized in quantum mechanics with the state vector as the sum of the representing cat states over the normalization coefficients, whose modulus square gives a 50% chance for one or the other case happening, as you already know by now. And then once the measurement has taken place, the system, here the cat in its superposition state, is projected onto one or the other axis representing a definite eigenstate, dead or alive. With this thought experiment, Schrödinger could show that it is not at all clear why we do not observe superposition states in the macro world, as this strange possibility certainly exists in the microscopic quantum world. At least in principle, this experimental setup shows that it is possible to have quantum superposition states for beings or objects the size of a cat. Did therefore Schrödinger find a loophole in this concept? If quantum mechanics is true, we should be able, at least in principle, to perform such an experiment and put cats in the dead-alive superposition state. However, the fact is, in our everyday life experience, nobody has observed this. So where is the mistake? Are we perhaps working with some false assumptions? Schrödinger's idea is only a thought experiment which can't really be performed, not so much because of technical or, if you wish, ethical limitations, but because one must first open the box to see in which state the cat is. However, this is an act of measurement which will cause the collapse of the state reduction. Therefore, we will never be able to determine how the cat felt before the box was opened. Even if the cat survives, it can't tell us because cats don't speak. So guess what? Why not use a human instead of a cat? And after the experiment, ask him or her how it feels to be in a dead and alive superposition. Would this be an alternative idea? Fortunately, we do not have to go that far to understand why there is no real paradox. However, we must first elucidate one of the most frequent misconceptions about quantum physics, one which is frequently stirred up by many popular media, as well as by some physicists who are eager to sell their books, and which is the supposed role of the observer in quantum physics. This little phrase, the role of the observer in quantum physics, has caused many misunderstandings. This is a famous YouTube video you might recognize, which suggests that there is a role of a conscious observer, the eye, blinking eye here, in determining where the electron or the photon or whatever kind of particle in the double slit experiment will place itself on which interference fringe on the detector screen. It suggests more or less implicitly the role of our mind or of our consciousness in the experiment. This is quite incorrect. What is meant by an observer in quantum physics? This is a question that we have to pose ourselves. What do we really mean by the word measurement in quantum physics, and how should we distinguish it from the word observer? After all, an observer measures, doesn't it? It is necessary to be cautious about not playing with words, which might lead accidentally or intentionally to several misunderstandings. A measurement in physics is, after all, nothing but a physical information readout, which usually, but not always, as we shall see later, is carried out via an interaction with the system to be measured. Is it really necessary that a measurement be linked to the observation of a conscious being, like a scientist, a human being looking upon something? This is a question. The point is, and this will turn out to be of paramount importance when people speak about the consciousness of the observer influencing the outcome of a quantum experiment, the point is that in quantum physics the notion of observation and measurement must be intended as being extended to any possible interaction of one system onto another. No physicist in a laboratory has ever directly observed a quantum phenomenon at a microscopic scale. Every measurement is not an observation they perform with their senses of sight or touch, but a readout performed nowadays usually by electronic devices like photodiodes, CCD cameras with laser beams. The wave function collapse or state reduction is caused by a measurement that these devices make, and that has no contact whatsoever with the observer's mind or consciousness. Should we consider the photodiode a conscious observer? Can a thermometer measuring the temperature in a room be regarded as an observer that observes temperature willingly and consciously? That is, if we would also like to think of an act of measurement performed by a mechanical apparatus as an observation, it must be clear that the mind or consciousness of the scientist using these devices to perform the experiment has nothing to do with what causes the outcome of the measurement. Therefore, this unfortunately widespread myth of the supposed role of the human mind or consciousness in quantum physics is only a misconception that has no scientific or logical ground. Observing in the quantum mechanical sense also means the interaction of one particle onto another. There is no logical reason to believe that the interaction between two particles or between a molecule and an electron is physically and conceptually different from the interaction between two physical objects, one which is the object to be observed and the other of which is the measurement device. Measurement is always about the interaction or information transfer between two material objects. In quantum physics, by an act of observation, we must not intend a conscious being or only macroscopic devices, but must also include the interaction of a particle with another particle. Every single interaction of the gazillions of particles in our environment is, according to quantum physics, a measurement, so to speak. Also, a single particle onto another can cause the entire wave function that describes the entire system as a unique quantum whole in a quantum coherent state to collapse instantly into a system of its separate constituents. That is, into the single particles which make up the cat, the hammer, and all the objects surrounding it. That is what is called quantum decoherence. But the number of molecules which make up the air, the cat's body, and the surrounding objects is huge, is of the order of Avogadro's number. And that is a number, Avogadro number is a number which tells us how many constituents a mole of a substance is made of. For instance, a mole of water is about 8.3 grams, and Avogadro number states that these 8.3 grams of water are made up of about 6.022 times 10 to the power 23 parts. This is an extremely huge number, and if you think about how these constituents interact with each other continuously, due only to the thermal motion of the atoms and molecules, the so-called Brownian motion, the Brownian motion that was also described by Einstein, it becomes clear that the decoherence time must be vanishingly small, only because of the interaction with the thermal excitations in the environment. This is called thermal decoherence. So, does this imply that a single particle could collapse the wave function of a quantum system? Well, things are a bit trickier than that. It turns out that it is only part of the truth. It solves the Schrödinger's cat paradox only partially. In fact, in quantum mechanics, several particles can also be entangled, and in quantum superposition while they are interacting with other particles. But this does not necessarily immediately lead to what we imagine as the wave function collapse. In fact, to have Schrödinger's cat experiment succeed, not only must the tiny atom be in superposition state, that is, we can describe the state function psi as a sum decayed plus not decayed. But this superposition must also hold, at least for a short time, for all the atoms and molecules of which the Geiger counter, the hammer, the poison, the walls of the box, the air molecules in the box, and especially all the cells of the body of the cat are made. And with them all being quantum entangled in a unique and coherent whole, all the particles. So, and since nobody has ever observed such a weird thing, there is a conceptual disconnect between what quantum mechanics suggests microscopically and what we experience macroscopically. This disconnect is an aspect of what is called the measurement or the quantum measurement problem, and in the next lecture we will see how the Schrödinger's cat paradox can find only a partial solution with what is called the quantum decoherence process, and in what sense the measurement problem still leaves some questions open until today.